All right, so exam one is over. So we have our meeting is going to be on Friday. So exam scores will be posted either Friday afternoon or Saturday. Um, so I'll have them posted as soon as we do our exam review. Um, but good job, you got through test one or exam one. Um, and keep keep doing what you're doing. Can everybody hear me? Okay. All right. So today we have chapter 6 and chapter 7. So chapter 6 is ethics applied to nursing practice. And then chapter 7 is nursing and the law. So I will share my screen. All right. Can everybody see the PowerPoint? Can y'all see the PowerPoint? Okay, great. Thank you. All
Yes.
right. So ethics. Um, so ethics is a system of standards or moral principles that direct actions as being right or wrong. So we look at ethics, it's concerned with the ways people, either individually or as a group, decide what actions are right or wrong. If one has the right to do something, if one has the duty to do something, right? Should they do something? Um, if they have the duty or well I said that if they have the right to do something, if they have the duty to do something. And so it also we think of within ethics, right? We also think of things like morals and values, right? Personal ethics provides guidelines for living, right? So you ultimately choose what your personal code of ethics includes. And that also is going to definitely influence your nursing ethics. Um, and there's going to be times in your nursing careers where your personal ethics may conflict with the state nurse practice act or the law. What are morals? Tell me what morals are. What are morals?
Like your personal values, your beliefs as far as what's right, what's important.
Right. It's, the right or wrong behavior, right? Or your conduct, your character. What are values? So morals are concerned with dealing with right or wrong behavior, right? Your conduct, your character. Values are, it's the worth you assign to an idea or an action. And values are affected by your age, your experience, your maturity. They generally change throughout your lifetime, right? As we gain new experience, as we gain new knowledge. So, it they just evolve over time. Um, when we look at the Western secular belief system, individual autonomy is self-rule, right? So we have our ability to think and then based on those thoughts, right, make the decision freely whether or not to seek healthcare, or, something else in our lives. Individual rights is the ability to assert one's rights, right? So we look at our clients, right? It's their ability to exert his or her rights. Um, so if they refuse treatment, right, that can be odds with our duty to always act in a way that will benefit the client. And so the client's rights has been a central theme of healthcare. So anytime you go into a healthcare facility, right, whether it's a doctor's office, whether it's an emergency or hospital, has anybody ever stopped to look and see those posters that have the patient's rights on there? Has anybody seen those going into like a healthcare facility? It has the patient's rights, the Bill of Rights. Um, and so they have the right to consent to care. They have the right to choose between alternative treatments. They have the right to consent or refuse treatment. And then, of course, we have women's rights, which are the rights over our own bodies. So, what is the final authority um, on what we can do as nurses? What's the final authority? What do we follow as nurses? What's our guide in our state of practice?
Best
The Nurse
practice
Practice
act.
Act.
Very good. The Nurse Practice Act, right? That's our final authority. That is what we are legally obligated to do as a nurse. It tells us what we can do as LPNs, as RNs, um, as advanced practice nurses, nurse practitioners, right? And so it is super important. Absolutely, no doubt about it. You need to know and have a really good understanding of what your Nurse Practice Act states and what you are allowed to do in the state that you are practice. Anybody want to become a travel nurse? All right, so quite a few of you, okay. So when you apply for licensure, right, you can apply for that multi-state license, right? When you go to sit for your NCLEX. So whatever your state that you reside in, whether it's Florida, whether it's Virginia, Pennsylvania, trying to think of what else, Ohio, right? Um, you have to have an understanding of that Nurse Practice Act. Just because you have a multi-state license and that you can go and you can work in another state, you have to be aware of the Nurse Practice Act in that state, right? So if you're in Pennsylvania and you decide that you want to go, work in New Jersey, okay, or, West Virginia, or I'm trying to think of what the other, Ohio, what are the other bordering states? If you're going to cross borders and you're going to work in another state, then you have to be 100% aware of that Nurse Practice Act as well. Because you can't just say, well, I didn't know, right? Because going that's not going to be a really good answer of something which, if you were to act outside of that Nurse Practice Act. So when we look at ethical responsibilities of nurses, what does it mean to be a client advocate? What does it mean to be an advocate?
Like respecting the client's wishes and like letting their healthcare team know like what they expect for their care and making sure that it's being followed.
Okay, so making sure that you are following the patient's wishes, right? Letting the healthcare team know. Okay, very good. What else is it?
Speaking up for the patient.
Sticking up for the patient, right? So think about, as a nurse, you're going to see patients on their best days, you're going to see patients on their worst days, right? And so a lot of times, when people are coming into a hospital, they're in a vulnerable state, right? They may be very ill, and whatever process is going in, right? We need to advocate for what is best for our patients, right? So in this situation, when we look at client advocacy, knowledge is power. We know that, right? The more knowledge that we have, the more we know, right, about what is going on, right? That is better for us. So, this is why we say that the patient is the center of the plan of care, right? They need to be involved in that nursing process as we establish, and even with the medical process as far as establishing their plan of care, and what is going to be expected. What if you know, it's just like if you read a doctor's order about a medication and, you know, you think that there's something wrong, whether it's the wrong dose, whether you think the medication is inappropriate, right? What's the one thing that we tell you to do is call the doctor and get clarification, right? That's advocating for your patient to make sure that they, you know, are not going to be harmed. Um, so, you know, advocacy is super important. What does it mean to be accountable?
Taking
Responsible for what we
responsibility.
do. Yeah.
Okay. Right. And you're answerable to yourself, your clients, your families, the providers, right? The healthcare team. So we have a lot of accountability as nurses. And so any actions that you perform or that you are assigned to perform, you are going to be held accountable for those actions that you perform. Clients or colleague reporting or this is even client safety reporting. So unfortunately in nursing or in any field, it doesn't matter, it's not just nursing, we're just held to a much higher standard. Any behaviors that are potentially harmful to clients must be reported, whether these are from, you know, your peers, your supervisors, or another team member. So if we suspect that they're impaired because of drugs, alcohol, if we believe that they are taking patients' medications, if they are, you know, providing non-medical substitutes, if they aren't providing, you know, safety for the clients, if they are verbal or physically abusive to clients, it is our job to report. Has anybody, so you guys are in leadership, has anybody ever looked at their board of nursing website to see, you know, why nurses have either had their license suspended, revoked, anything like that? Nobody's ever, so anything that you do, any actions against your license is public knowledge. And so you can go to your state board of nursing websites, you can look at case decisions, and you can see why nurses have, you know, had their license suspended, revoked, or, you know, other disciplinary actions. Unfortunately, there is a huge amount of drug diversion that occurs in nursing just because of access. So has anybody ever worked where had, you know, anybody seen a, you know, somebody that has been impaired at work, and had to make that decision to report them? So think about, you know, you go to work one night and one of the nurses that you're working with smells of alcohol. What do you think that can, you know, what kind of dangers do you think that that can lead to in a nursing unit?
Well, you can harm the
They're
patient.
in the wrong medication.
Right, there's a lot. They can harm the patient, they can give the wrong medication, right? They're not going to be, you know, provide for safety. They're also a safety hazard too, right? They could potentially get hurt or injured on the job. So it is your job to report that. The same thing if you know, see a nurse that is diverting medications, whether it's to, you know, for personal use or whatever, it is your job to report them. You do not have to confront them, but you do have to report them. System-based issues. This is especially essential when we're looking at providing safe, high quality care. So go in, you know, whether it's new equipment, whether it's a new procedure, you know, what'll end up happening is new equipment is put on the unit. They don't, provide the necessary education or training. And then the nurses don't know how to use that equipment. Night shift is usually the one that gets that, right? Come into work and there's new piece of equipment and you have no idea how to use it. So, if there's any new procedures, or new equipment that you have not had any training on, do not use that equipment. Make sure you get training. So you may have to notify your supervisor or the education, the educator at your site, to get education on how to use that equipment, right? Because using new equipment is, potentially hazardous as well. All right, so who has heard these terms before? The ethical principles, non-maleficence, beneficence, autonomy, fidelity, and justice. Who's heard those before? Okay, so what does non-maleficence mean?
No good.
Right. So it means to do no harm. So what are some nursing practice things that we do to prevent us from causing harm? Just basic. What are some things that we do that prevent us from causing harm to our patients?
Recheck your medication order at the bedside and whenever you pull it and three different times. Yeah.
Right, your 3 checks for medication administration. What else?
Mhm.
Good job. What are some other things that we do to ensure our patients'
Verifying
safety?
it's the right client.
Okay. All right. So our 6 rights for giving medications. What else?
Communicating.
All right. Communication. Very good. What else? Using
Knowing how
that
to
SBAR, right?
knowing how to do procedures correctly.
Knowing how to perform your procedures correctly. Yep. What else? Somebody else was saying something.
Allergies.
Allergies? Is that what you said?
Like checking the temperature, the shower water to make sure it's not too hot.
Very good, right? Even some of, yeah, checking your temperatures. Even putting the bed in the lowest position, right? Making sure your side rails are up, that they have their call bell, right? Those are all examples of non-maleficence. All right, so we have beneficence. Beneficence means to do good. All right, so that is, the basis of trust in nursing. All right, so it also involves preventing harm, removing harm, right? So, things like putting the client's needs first, right? If you're getting ready and it's time for you to go home, right? You want to make sure that you hand over the care, right, to the next shift, giving them a good report so they know that what is going on. It also means that if you do make an error, like a medication error, make sure that you report it as soon as you recognize that it has happened, right? Again, prevent harm. If we make a medication error, what's our first responsibility?
Assess the patient.
Good job. Assess the patient, right? Um, Also, placing the good of clients before our needs. And I know this is a little bit, sometimes it's like, what do you do, right? But there's things that we have to do prior to our end of our shift and making sure that everything is done, so that our patients, get the care that they deserve. Um, Autonomy, right? That's your freedom to choose. It also means respecting clients' independence and their right to choose, and determine a course of action. All right. So with that being said, they have the right to choose a course of action. All right. It doesn't mean that they can do whatever they want either, right? So there's a significant things, but think about, being autonomous, right? You're able to think, they're able to think through all the facts, then they can decide, what the best options are for themselves. And it is a decision that is made voluntarily without any coercion. And so our goal, right, is to assist our clients in making decisions that is best for them. And making sure that they have all the information needed to make that decision. When we look at autonomy, this sometimes can be very difficult situation, right? Especially if somebody decides, hey, I don't want to be here anymore. I'm going to sign myself out AMA, right? They have the right to do that. We can, try to educate them, provide them the information as to why they should not leave, right? But ultimately, they have the right to make that decisions. Fidelity means to be true. All right. So what does that mean as far as nursing goes, to be true?
Be honest with your client.
Okay, be honest with them, right? Always acting within our patients' or our clients' best interests, right? Um, what are, what are some examples of breaching fidelity?
Discussing clients in public area or leaving your computer open.
Very good, right? We don't talk about our patients or our clients, right? In the hallways, in the elevators, in the cafeteria, right? You definitely never want to mention a client by their name or any specific client characteristics, right? You never know who is listening to you, right? They may recognize it by something small that you say about that client. What would you do if you overheard another nurse or a couple, couple nurses talking badly about a client? What would you do? Has anybody ever been in that situation where they hear people talking, saying derogatory things about either another person or a patient?
I would just tell them like that's not appropriate. It's not professional of you as a nurse, as a provider to this patient, and that they should stop. And if it like continues, maybe bring it up to the supervisor.
Absolutely, right? Why get into healthcare, right? We are going to see all types of people, right? We're going to see the ones that are very compliant with their care. We're going to see ones that are very non-compliant with their care. And patients come in all shapes and sizes, right? And as nurses, we are to provide non-judgmental care, right? Without bias. And so making sure that we treat everybody with respect. All right. Justice means fair to all. What does that mean? What does it mean to be fair to all?
You provide the same quality care for one patient
And
and
equal amount of time.
Mhm.
all of
Right.
it.
What you do for one, you do for another, right? And one of the big things too is we do have to recognize and avoid personal bias, right? Anybody work in a long-term care facility or do clinicals in a long-term care facility, get your favorite resident, right? The one that that's just sweet as pie, or maybe not sweet as pie, maybe they're very what's the word I'm looking for? Feisty, right? There's, what you do for one, you have to do for the other. And so, avoiding any bias, favoritism, that kind of thing, making sure that we're giving everybody the same equal care. So there's also another term here. It's called beneficent paternalism. And so this is a disrespectful attitude towards the client, and what the client has to contribute to personal care and recovery. It's that I know what's best for you type of attitude. And it just kind of, pushes the client aside, doesn't take, their knowledge into consideration. Um, so, this could be even, if you had a patient who you're passing medications to them and, they know what their medications are, and, the pharmacy at the hospital may use a different drug manufacturer, and the pill that they normally take at home is yellow, but the one that you're trying to give them is white. Right. And they question that, and you're like, oh, just take the medication. It's the same. Don't worry about it, without recognizing or acknowledging their knowledge. Right. So that would be an example of beneficent paternalism. Um, not offering, options, right? Just kind of going and choosing options for the client without taking them into, their knowledge into consideration. The one time that beneficent paternalism can be used for good is if we have to get a court order to save the life of a child against the parent's wishes. And so, this could be if like a child needs some sort of a life-saving procedure, and the parents have refused to sign consent, then we can get a court order. Well, not we, but the hospital can get a court order and get guardianship in order to help that child. So that would be the one time that your beneficent paternalism would be used for good. All right. So any questions on chapter 6? All right, so chapter 7 is nursing and the law. And so a lot of this, going to talk about just a bunch of legal terms, as well as, as well as really getting into the Nurse Practice Act. So these are the terms that we are going to go through as we go through the chapter. So we talked about the Nurse Practice Act, right? That is going to be the what tells you what you can do. So it defines nursing practices. It also establishes those standards for nurses in your state. Again, you have to know what you can and cannot do under that Nurse Practice Act, because not knowing, right, that's not going to be a good defense. When you get your license, or you can go to your Board of Nursing website, you can look at your Nurse Practice Act, and you can see what you can and what you cannot do that is within your state. There are a lot of similarities across states. So, that's one of the great things about that compact license, or, where you can practice from one state into another, but there are always going to be some slight differences. So it is really important that you get those. So content of the Nurse Practice Act. So generally, general provisions of the Nurse Practice Act. It functions as the state boards of nursing. It also lists your general procedures, like, how much does it cost for you to renew your nursing license? How much does it cost for you to get your initial nursing license? It also outlines the licensure process, right? So what do you have to do, right? You have to graduate from a school of nursing, approved, Board of Nursing approved school of nursing. You have to have that background check, right? You may have to have some other things depending on what your state is. And then, of course, the school has to submit proof that you have completed your program as well as all of your clinical hours, right? And then go through your background check. And then, of course, you have to pass your NCLEX. When you're transferring, let's say, if you're transferring your license from one state to another. So, you can, like I said, with a compact license, you can work in multiple, another state with your compact license. But if you move, all right, so if you move from, Virginia to, I don't know, Montana, I'm just picking the state, or, Pennsylvania to West Virginia, wherever. If you are going to move and you are going to change your state of residency, then you have to change your state of residency. You have to apply for a nursing license in your new state. And then you're going to have to follow the rules for licensure there. Some states will require you to, complete an online course. Like for New York, for example, if anybody wanted to get licensed in New York, you would have to there's some child abuse modules that you have to complete. For Texas, there's a jurisprudence test that you have to take in order to transfer your license, right? So each state is going to have different requirements.
I'm sorry. So if you move from one state to another, but they're still compact states, you still have to transfer your license?
If you physically move like where you're going to live. So
No.
like
Even if it's still a part of the compact?
It's like 60 days. So like I said, if you decide that, hey, I don't like where I'm living anymore, I'm going to move to another state, and you establish residency in another state, then yes, you have to transfer your license. It's still a compact license, but it's just updating your like state of residency. If you're just traveling, then you don't. As long as as long as you have a physical address in the state that you were originally in. Does that make sense? So it's not if you're
Yeah, so you're saying
traveling.
like if I move from Ohio to Florida, like I would have to transfer my physical address to Florida, but I could still have a multi-state license.
Yes. Yep. They just want you to maintain your primary state of residency. So it's wherever you're physically living. You can travel wherever you want. That's not a problem. Because, some contracts are 3 months, some are longer. It just depends. But if you actually physically move all your belongings and establish residency in another state, you have to apply for licensure within that state.
Okay. That's good to know. I actually didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't either. I want to say Virginia, before I moved down here, Virginia had sent something out, and I just had seen it, and they were saying it's 60 days now. So if you move, you have to apply for licensure within 60 days. The content of the Nurse Practice Act, also will look at, what constitutes unprofessional conduct. It will give you information related to reasons for a suspended or revoked license. It also will provide for the impaired professional program. Impaired professional program is offered by, now the extent to which it's offered in different states is going to depend on that state. But if we have a nurse that has, an addiction, whether it's alcohol or drugs, they can self-refer to these programs. Their license will still be suspended, but they will have to go through the impaired professional program in order, it just makes it easier for them to get their license reinstated. But there are programs through your state boards of nursing to assist with nurses that have nurses, nurse practitioners, all of the above, that potentially have a drug or alcohol problem. Responsibilities of the Nurse Practice Act. It's going to give you your general functions as a nurse, whether it's an LPN, LVN, RN. It also will define nursing, right? So there are specific definitions for LPN, LVNs, as well as registered nursing. It also is going to outline the standards of nursing conduct. It also approval, administration of nursing programs, as well as continuing education. So in order to renew your nursing license really kind of depends on your birthday. Usually you renew every 2 years, all right? And you have to complete certain continuing education credits in order to renew your nursing license. And so make sure that you look and you see how many CEUs that you need to have prior, and it's yearly. So you have to do them every year. So you can't just do it once right before you're getting ready to renew your license. You have to keep up with it yearly. When we look at the State Board of Nursing, the state boards of nursing, can have either one nurse practice act for all of nursing, or they can have two separate nurse practice acts. One's for LPNs, LVNs, and RNs. It really just kind of depends. But some of the functions of the Board of Nursing, licensing and certification, specialty certifications are usually from related associations. So if you wanted to get as an LPN, if you wanted to get your like a long-term care certification, your wound and ostomy certification, those are usually offered through a related association. So you wouldn't get those through the Board of Nursing. The Board of Nursing also sets the fees. They establish the standards for educational programs. They approve the schools of nursing. They also determine duration and renewal of licensing. Some boards, well, most boards now they require continuing education credits for renewal of license. Most states are 2 years. I have seen a couple that were every year that you needed to renew. So that's going to be dependent on your state. They also maintain inactive status lists. So let's say you decide that you want to leave nursing, you can put your license in an inactive status. If in an inactive status, then you have the ability to renew your license. It also carries out disciplinary action for violators, develops programs for impaired nurses, and then, of course, suspending and revoking licenses, and dealing with the appeals process. So like I said, if anybody is curious, you can go to your State Board of Nursing and you can look to see everything. If you go before the Board of Nursing, everything is public record, okay? So go to whatever state you're in. You can look up, like I said, you can look up the case decisions. That'll tell you the name of the nurse. It'll tell you what happened, like whether it was a drug diversion. I actually saw one. A lot of them are drug diversions, unfortunately. Drug diversions, alcohol, a lot of that. I actually saw one. This was a former student from like 15 years ago that decided to call out sick from work and falsified a doctor's note. And the facility reported him to the Board of Nursing. And so he had to do continuing education on, I forget what it was. So there's a variety of reasons why. Not every time does somebody go before the Board of Nursing and their license got suspended or revoked, right? There can be other, whether it's continuing educations, they can do reprimands. It really just kind of depends on what the situation is. But just know once you become licensed, then that is a matter that is public record. They have access to your name. They have access to like when you got your license, when your license expires, what state you're in. Doesn't give addresses, like your home address isn't going to pop up there or anything like that. But just know that your license is a matter of public record. So if there is any action on your license, it will also be there for anybody to see. And just remember too, and things that you do out, a lot of times, people don't always realize that things that you do outside of nursing can also get you in trouble, with the State Board of Nursing. So, things, not that I would expect any of this from any of you, but like DUIs, that any kind of felony, especially if it's, a barrier crime, obviously drug, alcohol, issues can affect your nursing license as well. So when we look at disciplinary board actions related to unprofessional conduct, there can be a fine or some sort of a civil penalty. There can also be a referral to an alternate to discipline program for practice monitoring and recovery support. So again, if we have a nurse or that has potential drug or alcohol issue, that we can put them in some sort of a practice monitoring program. They can do public reprimands, they can do censures, they can put restrictions on your license. So like I've seen one where the nurse was not able to pass narcotics. They could pass other medications, but they were not allowed to pass narcotics. So there can be specific limitations on your license. They can also limit or restrict, like I said, limit or restrict one or more aspects of practice. They can also suspend, they can revoke licenses, they can request voluntary surrender of licenses. And then other remedies, like I said, in some situations, let's say, you don't pass everybody's medications, but you sign them off, or you sign off a treatment, but you really didn't do the treatment. A lot of times in those situations, they'll provide you continuing education, right? On, certain courses that are offered through the Board of Nursing for you to complete. Examples of unprofessional conduct: negligence. This is, you don't do what a reasonable, prudent nurse would do in a similar situation. Does present a serious risk to the health, safety, or mental health of the client. Violations of the Nurse Practice Act. Some states list specific violations, whether it's unprofessional conduct, trying to think, becoming personally involved with a client, right, would be a violation. Incompetence, so just not meeting the standard of care, or, if they have any sort of a psychological or mental disability that interferes with client safety. Unethical conduct, so this would be a breach of confidentiality, refusing to provide care for someone because of race, creed, color, national origin, disease, or sexual orientation, violation of the ethical codes for practice, as well as failure to maintain nursing competence. Again, make sure that you know what your CEs, your continuing education that are required for you to renew your license. Alcohol or drug abuse. Okay, this like diversion of drugs. It's usually controlled medications, right, for personal use. And so you decide that, the patient requests a pain pill, so you go to pull their Percocet out of the Pyxis, and instead of giving the Percocet to the patient, you give them a Tylenol, and you take the Percocet. That would be a diversion of drugs. Unfortunately, some nurses do steal, some sell the diverted substances, as well as equipment. And then, of course, falsify the records, right? So that the patient is not getting the medication and the care that they need. So disciplinary steps. So this is important to understand. Okay. So a state or nurses reported for stealing clients' narcotics. All right. So after receiving the complaint, determining that a chemical has affected the nurse's judgment, rendering them unsafe to practice, and confirming the stolen narcotics are a violation of the Nurse Practice Act and the law, the board will review the complaint. So somebody has submitted a complaint. All right. They, determine that, it is a violation. They are going to review the complaint. The board will then investigate. They're going to question witnesses. They are going to gather evidence. All right. And then the nurse will have the opportunity to respond to the allegations during the board proceedings. And then the board action follows the board proceedings, and that's where the disciplinary action is going to occur. Whether it's, the monitoring system, whether it is suspension, revocation, whichever. There are emergency situations, right, where they can do an immediate suspension, depending on the level of the infraction, which, in some cases, they can do an immediate suspension and then they can go through the process. We look at reporting and enforcement. Like I said, your nursing license is a matter of public record. So NURSIS, which is the National Database for Verifying Licenses, it also will show discipline and action, against a person's license. It gives the nursing license number, the date of license expiration, as well as any violations. There's also a nurse, the National Practitioner Databank. This is, the federal law requires that adverse actions taken against a healthcare professional's license be reported to that databank as well. So nursing standard of care. So, we've spent the last, 15 months in nursing school, almost 15 months in nursing school, learning about standard of care. But that standard of care, that's your guide for good nursing care. And the standards are based on what an ordinary, prudent nurse with similar education and nursing experience would do in a similar circumstance. So when we look at resources for nursing standards of care, your Nurse Practice Act, right? That's the minimum level of competency that you need to have as an LPN or an RN. Your NCLEX, right? That also tests for minimum competence. Written policies and procedures, right? Organizational policy and procedures. That is, what the agency that you work for expects from you. That's the standard of nursing care that must be followed within that organization. There's also the laws, right? There's NAPNIs, and a lot of other resources out there for you to establish that nursing standard of care. How does the law affect us? So we have common law and we have statutory law. And so common law is judge-made law, right? That's what initiates in the courts. It's one-way process to establish standards of legal conduct. It's useful for settling disputes. Statutory law is developed by the legislative branch of the government, legislative branch of the government in the U.S. Congress. And so your Nurse Practice Act is actually an example of a statutory law. We look at criminal versus civil. All right. So criminal action involves people and society as a whole. And so most of us as nurses, we won't be involved in any criminal action, but your criminal actions, your misdemeanors, right? Um, Generally, that's a less serious charge. We have our felonies, which is a more serious event. Usually they will go to, somebody that has committed a felony, right, can go to jail for more than a year. And so a felony would be like if a nurse, injects the client with a lethal drug or removes life support before the client has been pronounced dead, that would be a felony. When we look at civil, your civil is more individual versus individual. So there is some sort of a infringement on their individual rights. This one usually results in some sort of a monetary compensation. So like if, just think about it, like if you were at work and, there was water on the floor and you slipped and you fell and you hurt your back, right? You would go to court, right? There you get your unemployment, right? You get some sort of a monetary monetary compensation. We also have torts. We have intentional torts. That is an intentional tort is intended to cause harm to the client, whether it's a threat or actual physical harm. Your unintentional torts, they didn't mean to harm the clients. And this is like when we went back, right, and we look at patient safety, it's not following the 6 rights of medication administration. It's not performing your 3 checks. It's not putting the bed in the lowest position, the side rails up, right? So somehow caused injury to our client. Other types of intentional torts, we have assault and battery. Assault is an attempt or threat to touch someone. So like somebody says, I'm gonna beat you up, right? So that would be an assault. Battery is the actual physical harm, right? So I threatened to beat somebody up, that's assault. Battery is actually me hurting somebody. False imprisonment, use of restraints. What type of restraints are out there? Is it just physical restraints?
There's
What other restraints?
Chemical
chemical
restraints.
restraints.
We have chemical restraints, right? And so we look at false imprisonment, use of restraints, right? It's, even closing their door and not allowing them to come out of their room is a restraint, right? Whether it's giving that, that medication for, agitation, anxiety, just to get them to, not be, bothering you, that kind of thing. So we have to be really careful with that. Defamation is damaging someone's reputation through false communication, or communicating without their permission. The 2 terms that fall under here are libel and slander. So libel is written defamation. So I wrote it out, whereas slander is verbalized defamation, like gossiping or talking bad about somebody. And of course, we have physical and emotional abuse. Physical abuse is generally easier to identify versus your verbal abuse or your emotional abuse, right? But those are some of your intentional torts. Unintentional torts, these are the things that we really especially have to be careful with. This is like your negligence. Negligence is failure to use reasonable, prudent, or failure to use care as a reasonably prudent and careful person would under similar circumstance. So when it brings us to our malpractice, which is our professional negligence. The most common type of negligence in practical nursing or LVNs relates to action or a lack of action. not what you intended to do. So these are what we call acts of commission or acts of omission. So like giving the wrong medication would be an act of commission, or not giving a medication or forgetting to give a medication would be an act of omission. All right. And there's a variety. Medication errors are common sources of malpractice, working while impaired, failing to communicate, not supervising a client, not acting as an advocate for your client. What else? Not getting informed consent would be an example of negligence, professional negligence. What else? There you go. So anybody have, or has anybody thought about getting malpractice insurance? So this is something that is, totally up to you, because nurses are being named in lawsuits more so now. And so, we assume a liability for our own acts, right? So we have to be very careful. That's why I said always follow your Nurse Practice Act, and your standard of care.
Where do you
So,
malpractice insurance?
I'm sorry.
Where do you obtain malpractice insurance?
So there's some nursing organizations that offer malpractice insurance. I would look through NACNI's. So there's a variety of different places that offer malpractice insurance. Like I always look at like the organizations and who the organizations recommend, right? Because that's going to be your best bet, whether it's NAPNI's, the American Nurses Association. So, it used to be like, oh, your organization's got your back kind of thing. But, depending on what the situation is, if the award, when it goes to jury and the award is, goes over what the hospital's malpractice insurance limit is, right, then that money is going to have to come out of your pocket. Your employing agency or the company that you work for, could pay out an award to a client and then turn around and sue you to recover that money. Usually, if you acted outside your scope of practice or your scope of employment, the agency will back you. They'll tell you that, it's not liable because you acted outside of your practice. And your policy from your employer is only going to cover you while you're on the job. So if something were to happen, right? It's better to have your own unemployment. It's better to have your own malpractice insurance just to save, for your own peace of mind. And so this too is another thing, there's things called statute of limitations, right? So if something happens, there's a certain amount, you may not work for that organization, that was 5-10 years ago or 5 years ago, you've been moved on and you were working at another facility, but something comes up while you were employed at that facility and that organization may not cover you because you don't work there anymore. So there's a variety of different things that can happen. I don't know the statute of limitations for everything. I also just still keep very detailed notes about situations that arise while I'm at work. So if somebody were to, come at and try to prove negligence, first they have to prove duty. So did you have a responsibility to provide care in an acceptable way? And did you breach that duty? Did you not adhere to the nursing standard of care, whether it was an act of omission, whether it was an act of commission? That is where a, what do you call it? A expert nurse or a legal nurse will come in and they will establish, the standard of care and whether it was violated. the client also has to prove that there was damages, right? So that, were they injured or hurt in some way, but they have to be able to prove actual damage. And they also have proximate cause. And that, that act of omission or that act of commission is what actually caused harm to that patient. So when we look at steps of legal action, so steps for bringing legal action. So the client thinks that, there is, was some sort of a violation. So the client is going to go to an attorney, right? The attorney is going to have an expert nurse review the client's chart and see whether the nurse has violated any nursing standard of care. If it, at that point, if it's determined that there was a standard of care that's been violated, that's when the lawsuit is going to be filed. Okay. So just because the client says, I want to sue this nurse or I want to sue this facility, they are going to get an expert to review prior to actually filing the lawsuit. And then the client files a complaint that will, lay out the grievance, and that will be presented to the defendant, the nurse, whoever. And then the defendant has the ability to respond. And then during that is when the discovery period will occur. So that's we're going to get statements from the nurse. We're going to get statements from witnesses, the nurse expert, the client, caregivers, right? We're going to get all of that information, or they're going to look at policy and procedure. And then we could potentially go to trial. And that's where everything we know is presented, right? To, a jury or to the church, to the judge, the plaintiff, right? The one that is seeking the lawsuit, they are the ones that have the burden of proof, right? They have to prove that there was wrongdoing done. And then, that's when the decision will be made, the verdict will be given. And of course, there is always the opportunity for appeals to occur as well. Privacy and confidentiality information that has to be revealed. So we always talk about HIPAA, right? We talk about, not sharing, not talking about anything, not, making sure nobody's overhearing. But in all situations, in these situations, these must be revealed or reported. So communicable diseases like you learned in community, right? These are reported to the health department, or even the CDC. Vaccine-related adverse reactions are reported to the Department of Health and Human Services. There's also another website, and I can't remember the name of it. It's not in your book, but that we can report vaccine-related adverse reactions. Any criminal acts, any equipment-related injuries, if there is a clear and present danger, right? So if there is any kind of mistreatment or professional misconduct, that must be reported to your immediate supervisor. If there's any abuse or neglect of an older adult or a child, right? We know that we are mandatory reporters, and that needs to be reported immediately to your supervisor, so that steps can be taken. HIPAA is your privacy, right? This is again not talking about your clients in the hallway, in the elevator, making sure that you're locking your computer screens when you leave, that you're not leaving them up for people to come up behind you. All clients will receive a copy of the HIPAA or the privacy practice. If they feel like their privacy has been violated or if something else occurs, then it is our job to give them that information, right? We'll give them the number to the privacy officer, And that's where an investigation will be started to determine if there was actually a breach in their information. All right, any questions?